Good evening and welcome back to Zoom and Land of Confusion. We were trying to get Flickr to computer to work with the other system and it wasn't working, and no one was showing up to talk in our chat. So I was like, well, we can go back to the system that works. So that's what we're doing here. And tonight we're talking about I wasn't able to get a guest. So I was like, didn't want to cancel the show. And I was like, hey, why don't we just have a talk? We could talk about some of the exciting things that happened this week, and we could talk about maybe what's on the main feed for an hour. And Flickr was just asking me about why I don't feel very good right now. And it was just, I had a terrible day at work. I've been training for this new job for a couple of weeks now, and today was supposed to be like my first day on my own, and I just made mistake after mistake after mistake, and it just compounded and snowballed and just was not. The training supervisor is normally a very cheerful person. She was not today. It was just like a disaster. I did get through it and we did get everything fixed and it's all fine, but it was like, and then of course we were late to the show because I thought it was an hour earlier than it was. Just, one of those days.
I hear you. Yeah. What are you doing then? What do you do? I don't tell what I do, but I mean, I'll ask you what you do.
Sure. I work for, I'm currently got a 6-month contract load planning for a company called Penske. And I've worked for them previously for a couple of years, and then I left after my father passed away because I needed to take care of that stuff. But load planning is when we have, in this particular case, there's a cross dock factory in for Whirlpool products in Milton, Ontario, and also a cross dock for them in Calgary. And I'm planning all the loads leaving the Calgary to other cross docks and eventually even into stores in for these. Actually, no, from the stores to other customers for them. So normally, yeah, I'm handling anywhere from what they say 5 to 20 trucks a day, which is weird because I used to work in the grocery business, and the grocery business was 100 trucks a day sometimes. So it's a very different experience. And I'm like,
well, I'm sure you'll do well.
yeah, but it is definitely only a 6-month contract, as they say, because we lost the client and they're going with another customer. So they were like, I was given the impression that the 6 months was maybe probationary, but I don't mind. Like, I have plans that I'm hoping the world will be more open next year, as it's starting to look like it will be. And come April, when the contract runs out, I hopefully will go first to Vegas and then overseas.
Really? Where overseas?
I'm looking to go to the, we'll see what it's like, but I might fly into London first for a few days. As my father used to say, you want to get acclimated to Europe and all that. And the best way to do it is to go into England, where sort of similar to what you have experienced back home. And then I want to go to the Netherlands, where my grandfather, and France, where my grandfather fought, and go through, like, he landed at Dieppe. He landed on D-Day. And he fought up into what is called the Battle of the Scheldt, which is the Netherlands. So he was fighting there. So I'm going to try and follow some of his units, travel there, and also just see some of the battlefields myself. And the great thing about those places is, like, France has like World War I battlefields and World War II battlefields and Franco-Prussian War battlefields and just all these other things. You can go look in Napoleon battlefields. So there's a lot of battlefields to look for, and I'm looking forward to seeing them. I'm also looking to go to Bulgaria because I hear it's great place to get to invest in. So I'm looking at buying some property there, so that, say, next time the government decides to lock down me and my house for a year and a half, I can say, no, I'm going to go visit my other place for a while.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Bulgaria. Huh. Do you speak the language, or?
No, but I understand that Bulgaria, a lot of Europe is now, English is now the main second language, that especially on young people because of all the American television and stuff. You can find people who speak the language pretty quickly if you're in one of the major cities. Like if you go look, I was watching this video of one of the islands in Greece, and just kind of curious, and it was and all the restaurants on this island, most of the signs are in English because it's the one language everyone speaks.
Yeah, the first words spoken on the moon were English.
Right. Hard to believe that one little island made such a big impression.
That is weird, isn't it? What caused that? I mean, you
they
don't
were
have
in
to
the
go
right
into great
place.
detail, but
Yeah, they have the right. They seem to be in the right place at the right time for a lot of different things. Being that island, like coal was in natural abundance, so they had the stuff. But I think Protestantism is the big launcher of almost everything. It's a combination of Protestantism and the Black Death. So the Black Death came along and wiped out 1/3 of Europe, which created the first real labor shortage they had in so long. So suddenly the peasants who were stuck, tied to their land, would go somewhere else for the first real time. And so you had this kind of movement of stuff. I mean, the printing press, of course, but it's just a bunch of things kind of came together all at the right time in Europe, and especially in England, was just because they were surrounded by water. They had the ability to go anywhere at any time.
And when did this start? When did the empire, well, when did the East India Tea Company come about?
Oh God, I'm not too sure about, that's like 17th century. I'm not a big expert on the East Indian Tea Company and that kind of stuff, but I can say the first real act of empire is considered the Quebec Act, when they conquered Quebec, and they said, oh, unlike every other time before, we're going to like destroy and basically culturally assimilate this conquered people. They said, no, there's just too many of them, like they did with the people in New Brunswick that they shipped off to Louisiana and some of the other islands. They like really destroyed that people and like profited heavily from it. And in the Quebec Act, they're saying there's just too many of these people. We can't do that. So we're going to let them keep their language and their culture. And we're enshrining that in law. We're going to make, they still have a few things that they're going to have to adopt from us. We're going to give them their local parliamentary system. They're not, but beyond that, yeah.
I wish she were on this this call as well, because I've wondered. As I started reading 3 or 4 years ago, 5 years ago, and I started reading with the earliest non-Shakespearean works, and I'm still reading British novels and like popular novels, common novels, and there seems to be really a strong a British personality, the stiff upper lip, the laconic speech, the use of the word quite or not quite, as in he's not quite. And
well,
I just wondered if which came first, the laconic personality or the empire.
Oh, I'm pretty sure the personality. I really don't know to say the personality. It's like something I've never really thought about that in the kind of a cultural sense. It's sort of like why the whole. I'm remembering that forgotten movie from the 1990s of was it Tarzan? No, not Tarzan. The Jungle Book remake from the 90s that almost no one remembers. And there's a scene where the bad guy says to the guy who's just shot, who's slowly bleeding out, and he's like, well, he's just like the English army, he'll make do. And there's something to that. I did hear one good description of it. You know why the English conquered the world? It's because they only start drinking at noon.
Well, but they quit that again just a year or two ago, didn't they? Didn't they outlaw or do away with the British pint at lunch?
Oh, I haven't heard that, but yeah, I'm sure that's in some of the public servants. I definitely remember watching all the old Morse detective series, and how many times they're just going in the middle of the day to get a pint. Like, oh, let's go have a beer and think about how to solve this crime. I'm like, that's a little different than how it is today.
Yeah. Yeah. And that, I mean, I don't, this is not a directed conversation, I guess, but I'm just thinking of the French. Even the French have taken on, I guess, 5 or 10 years ago, they outlawed drinking and driving, which apparently really affected it affected the wine industry to the point that they were actually converting wine into ethanol for use in cars.
Wow.
Yeah. Well,
things to learn.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that's kind of the brief history of the English Empire. But I was thinking we could talk a little bit about the exciting things where elections didn't get stolen this time, as far as we know.
Well, I think that I forget who it was that said, I think he wrote a post saying that Youngkin should demand a recount, or no, and an audit. Yes. And I thought that is brilliant.
Yeah, certainly it was what I thought when I saw someone on Twitter was complaining, well, all those Republicans, they're not going to demand an audit now that they've won the election. And I'm like, no, I would totally think you should call for an audit even after you win the election, just to prove it, that things you should audit every election.
Yeah, well, in this case, I think that it's not to change the outcome so much as to see exactly what percentage of fraud was involved, because I
or
get
just
the feeling
learn
there
best
was.
practices, see what works, see what didn't. Just what you do in any audit, just to show that every corporation gets an audit, all these other things. It's just like, it's good for transparency. Just every time we have one of these elections, we do it. I think the Canadian elections, from what I understand, are audited. My condo board election, we have scrutineers on it. That was what always got me about the 2020 result. I'm like, look, guys, like, my condo board election is more secure than many of the state elections.
Yeah, I still like the term scrutineers, because they don't use magnifying glasses, do they? And stand over your shoulder and grunt and
Well, they didn't wear. I was in one contested nomination that was later investigated by the Ontario Provincial Police on accusations of fraud. So these people who go, there's no such thing as election fraud, dude. It happened where I was a poll clerk. Now, I didn't do anything other than the fact that what happened with the scrutineers, this was like this very heated nomination. The rules were changed after this nomination because someone from the Peller wine family, which is big here, decided he wanted to run. He's probably spent at least 100, 150, maybe 200 grand trying to win a nomination, which is unheard of in here. He put full page, 3/4 page, full color ads in the local newspaper, inviting people to one of the poshest places in the city for his announcement that he was running for office. And I said to some of the people, can you imagine what would happen if someone with some real acumen got a hold of this guy? Like, I was shocked by some of my friends who were professional campaign managers who didn't like just jump on his stuff. But he was kind of an egomaniac, and he came in third after spending money, this ridiculous sum of money, to get a job that pays maybe 190 grand a year. But yeah, so so what happened is that with the scrutineers in that particular case, so I'm a poll clerk, and there were all four of the parties had scrutineers at each one of the poll tables. The people who organized this thing should have been fired, and I think a lot of them were later because they did such a terrible job of organizing things. And there were just people wearing shirts that were like their supporter shirts. I had a guy who was a Filipino scream at him because the people, all the scrutineers, challenged any slight like, sorry, my name is he registered under the party name as Jack something, but his license plate and his photo ID, which was what was required to vote, by the way, showed that his original name was Giacomo or Giacomo. And people challenged him. They challenged anything that was slightly off. If your address was slightly different, if your thing, and one group that my friend was running his team, and who started it, but every single one of the scrutineers were challenging every single issue, and then sending them over to the thing. The guy who from the Peller wine family, he brought in like. He went down. There's a local university here or college, which is basically full of Chinese people, right? So I can't remember what the name of it is, but it's basically like a trade school, and they're a foreign trade school. So people come to Canada, and it's all Chinese people. I've never seen. He went down there and he cleaned out and bought memberships for all these people, which is illegal, but it's not. It was back then. It was a bit more free. Now you're required to, if you're giving your donation, you have to sign an affidavit that this is your money and no one's giving it to you. And all memberships are by credit card. Yeah, and yeah, I had never seen so many red communist passports, because that's what the ID, all these students were being told who were memberships. I had people come up to me and say, oh, our friend bought us the membership. And I'm like, you don't even live in the riding. Like, you just admitted to committing election fraud, and you don't even live here. Like, yeah.
Well, what is, you see, actually, I was sort of curious about, I was reading about the poll watchers in the 2020 election, and then I read about BDB's experience in this past election, and it seems like poll watchers really have to maintain a distance. I don't know if that's because of COVID, or
I think that was because of COVID, the way he was describing it.
But
not like.
You'd think that the clerk, or whatever they're called, the one working with the citizen to do the vote, that they're going to be just, 18 inches or 2 feet apart, looking at the same documents. Why doesn't the poll watcher have that same closeness? I don't quite understand.
Well, he would normally have that in a normal election. I'm sure this was just COVID rules. Yeah. You can see pretty much what you need to by being 3 to 6 feet away. I don't think that's a big deal. It sounds like he was able to actually see the documents when requested. It's not like it was in Pennsylvania or at the Georgia election, where the people are like so far away you can't see what's going on. But it sounded like in his case, he was able to see and clearly do things. So I'm going to guess they just had a 6-foot rule, and he got to look at the books every so often, which, given that I've done like multiple polls at the same time, that's not unheard of. Like, and poll watching is, you do different things. You're there to ensure the integrity of the vote. And also it's part, at least around here, it's part of the get out the vote operation. You want to know who's voted from your party, so you can phone them up and see if they may have voted. You want to see if they haven't voted, you can say, hey, we got a car ride here for you to take you to the polling station. I've driven plenty of people to the polling station. You want to understand how the central parties are going to have these war rooms full of people, getting all that information coming in, telling them who's been voting against the voters list that they have, and trying to gauge where they are in the in their turnout, and if they're winning or not.
Yeah. Boy, I'm just so naive about voting. I always just thought that if you wanted to vote, vote. If you cared enough to know to vote, then you should vote. If you don't care enough, then stay home. But it doesn't work like that, does it?
Yeah. One of the things people need to understand is people think political parties are these combinations of ideologies. And I keep hearing this from a lot of the people who talk on the podcast, either reporters or the podcasters, but almost none of them have ever done anything in elections themselves. So I'm getting lectured to by people who've never done anything. At least Gary Robbins, for all his saints, he's at least done the work, right? So I have all these people who are coming up to me and trying to tell me things, and I'm like, dude, you've never done any of this, you don't know what you're talking about. But the point I was trying to make about political parties, the point of a political party is to get elected. And they're going to figure out all the different ways. They're going to sit down, they're going to do polling, and they're going to figure out their platform, and they're going to like add different groups to get them over the, in Canada, usually it's the 40% limit because we have 3 major political parties. So that's the magic number, is usually 40, not 50. But you're all trying to get to 50+1, and you're figuring out all the different groups to form your coalition. And you're and the whole and the other part of a political party is to get out the vote on election day. And people, all these people who have no idea, and a lot of the people who don't even understand this are the candidates themselves, because they have a completely different job. But the campaign management teams, like I said a long time ago, most of the MPPs I know don't know how they got elected, right? That's not their job, and it shouldn't be their job. They're just to do, their job is to listen to the campaign manager, who should hopefully know his job, right?
So let me ask you, there are 2 things that have come up actually in the last couple of weeks on the comments. And one is what is conservative, what is the ideological background for the Republican Party? And the second thing is that I think that the Republican Party, I think that the purpose of a party is that people can come together. I think this is what you just spoke about.
Yeah.
People, and said it's not the case. People can come together for mutual benefit to get somebody in office that will more or less 80% represent them. But
right.
You seem to be saying that it's actually the candidate that and his team and the party heads that sort of control the show, and they're actually the ones motivating the grassroots to vote for their candidate.
Yep, that's pretty much it. People have a misunderstanding because most of them have never participated in the process other than to vote, right? Or to get their election signed. They just don't realize the thing. I very early on, we had Stephen Harper's campaign manager, who was then appointed to the Senate in Canada, came to a fundraiser, and it was just about a few of my friends, our local association, and my father, who of course is a political science, wrote a book on the Parliament of Canada. So he enjoyed it. But the campaign manager just laid out what I just explained to you. He said he and the Prime Minister, Stephen Harper, who wasn't Prime Minister then, he was Leader of Opposition, sat down and they worked out, they started doing polling to try and figure out the coalition of all the people who could get them over the 40% mark. And they did it. And they won, and then they were the government for 10 years. And a lot of people just don't understand. You know, there's a whole machinery here. It certainly helps in America that you register party identification, because we don't do that. It blows my mind that most people would not know, would not be registered. You're registering with the government that you're Republican, Democrat, or Independent. You're only registering with your party here, and you're buying a membership. Like someone like Donald Trump can never become leader here, because the party brass would say, no, we're not letting you be our candidate. Sorry.
Yeah. And so as to what it is to be a Republican, I thought that a Republican was a sort of an umbrella label that under which each individual said, well, I believe this, I believe 80% of what the Republicans say, and so I'll be a Republican. But also it seems like, I guess when Hillary Clinton was running for office, the Democrat Party was voting on their planks, and I think that they said something about God, or keeping under God in the Pledge of Allegiance, or something like that. And the people in the arena just booed, and the guy at the podium finally said, by voice acclamation, it's passed.
Right.
And but so you're saying that, it sounds like you're saying that to be a Republican is basically a top-down process of deciding who's going to run and what they're going to run on and who they're going to appeal to. And yet I perhaps naively say that the party process is everybody who's interested in voting coming together and supporting the or creating the hierarchy.
Mm.
But here the question is, the planks or in the Republican platform, are they do they represent on a 4-year or a 2-year schedule? Do they represent what the Republicans, what the ideology of the Republican Party is?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, Randy Wovoda would be the best guy to really ask about this, since he's a Republican county chair, or used to be one. But and he's and we don't have that. We do have a bit of that party process, but a lot of the times it's really developed because elections here are a month. Okay, we have a specific period when it's the bull, when it can be like more like a horse race. So I'm used to, like, in America, these guys, you've elected the new elections every 2 years, and it's an election almost immediately. But in Canada, it's like most people don't realize there's an election until about 2 weeks into it, and it's a 5-week period. But the planks and are voted on, and I guess they do just kind of represent what the local parties are wanting. But when's the last time you read anything in your local party, in your state or federal platform?
Oh, I've never. I wouldn't do that.
Most people don't do it. So, like, I remember some people freaking out about something in a Republican platform a few years ago, and I went and said, okay, well, I'm going to look at your Democrat platform for your state, buddy. And I did, and I found like 5 absolutely cockamamie things, and no one complained after that. But it was just like, like, it's the nature, the platforms. They're just more, once the campaign is going, and there's someone said an election is a terrible time to talk policy. It's a famous thing, because a sitting prime minister in a debate basically said something like, it's a terrible time. It's like, it's true, it's a terrible time, because if you're explaining, you're not winning.
It sounds like party affiliation is sort of like, I remember once somebody was, I think it was Chef's Illustrated or something like that, or Industrial Kitchen or whatever the show was. They did a poll on what the best mayonnaise was, or what the favorite mayonnaise was. And I think it was Hellman's versus, I forget what other brand, Kraft.
Yeah.
And it came down to basically what your mother had served you as a child. And it seems like, and no one cared what was in the mayonnaise or how it was manufactured or anything. It's just more or less, it was just a laissez-faire choice that basically was how you were raised to be. Is that more an accurate representation of how people become Democrats and Republicans?
There's certainly something to that. I remember one of my local volunteers coming up to me and said, I don't understand why no one wants to vote for Canada. I've been doing all this door knocking, but people don't want to do it. And I said to him, Danny, who's, by the way, William Shatner's cousin, which is funny.
Oh, yeah.
But they haven't spoken to since Shatner's father's funeral. So that was 50 years ago. But it was just kind of, so Danny, I said to him, you're from Montreal. Yes. Your wife's from Toronto. Yes. You're a Montreal Canadian fan and your wife's a Maple Leaf fan. He's like, oh yeah. And I'm like, so basically imagine you're going through down to the streets of Toronto and banging on hockey fans' doors and trying to convince them that the Canadians are going all the way this year. And he's like, oh. It's like, yeah, that's the thing. So we have lots of people. The coalition you're often putting together is often based on the fact that that's the swing voters you're you're targeting, trying to figure out who the swing voters are and getting the vote for you, because there is basically 40% of people are just going to vote Republican and 40% are going to vote Democrat no matter what happens. It's the 20% of the persuadable middle. And sometimes you get like what's been happening in the States, where there is an electoral shift, and people who are like the neocons are going back home to the Democrat Party. All the working class blue collar vote is moving into the Republican Party, and it is really shaking things up. But that happens once every 40 to 80 years. It's not something that happens. I think the last big someone might say the so-called Southern strategy, which I still don't believe exists, but certainly the FDR coalition building is certainly when he managed to get all these different groups together to vote Democrat for a long time.
Let me. There seems to be a common view on Ricochet that for 20 years or 40 years, the Republican Party hasn't ever been actually promoted really what their voters have wanted. My favorite example is that when Trump, the first 2 years in office, everybody had been saying prior to that, for 4 years prior, repeal Obamacare. And when they had the Senate and the House and the presidency, nobody put forth any meaningful bills. And plus, there was also some side misdirection, which is that, well, we have to come up with a better plan than Obamacare. No, just repeal it.
Right.
And everybody knows, every insurance company and every medical office has the old forms that they can go right back to in 24 hours.
Right.
But the Republicans didn't do that, and I just
they passed it in the House and went to the Senate, and there was suddenly McConnell tried to force some tough votes, and McCain and a few others these people who are in these sometimes really ridiculous safe spots voted against it. So, yeah. I mean, how can you deal with it? I mean, look at Joe Manchin. The Democrats are railing against Joe Manchin, but the fact is that you had Lisa Murkowski in Alaska, one of the safest seats anyone could have, is voting. She's one of the most moderate people who is not going to take any chances. So in the end, they stopped trying to pass legislation, and they did. Unfortunately, what we've been seeing a lot of institutional failure on is to just drive everything through the court system. And that's why they appointed a lot of judges, which are going to help out in the next few years. But the fact is, it's like, really, I was listening to commentary the other day, and they made John J-Pod made a great point. He's like, look, we really need to get Congress to be Congress again and stop putting so much power in the imperial presidency. And I'm like, yeah, that is the long-term solution. Because Congress keeps punting onto the presidency or onto the courts. A lot of people are saying that the vaccine mandate that Joe Biden's pushing through is just something he expects to lose in court, but he's doing it so that he can say, I did it.
Right. Yeah. Well, this is the OSHA decree that he's talking about.
Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this. Let's shift a little bit off of politics. Sure. And this can be just very short because the answer is probably 25 words or less. Well, maybe not. But one thing I just keep wondering, I almost wake up every day wondering, why do we need 100% vaccination? It doesn't make scientific sense. It doesn't make moral or free sense in terms of freedom and the Constitution or it doesn't even take into account herd immunity or anything like that. Just as an aside, why do you think that they're pushing for 100% vaccination, even children down to the age of 5?
A lot of panic. Like they unleashed war level panic, and some of this is even hitting them. Like there's some people who are fanatics and they just believe that this is the best policy. Other people are they basically released war level propaganda we won't see outside of wartime. And I don't mean like the war on terror propaganda. I mean like World War II, we're all in this together, buy war bonds, but we're not, instead of buying your war bond, you're buying a shot, right? The fact that Pfizer, I don't know if you ever watched Russell Brand. He's a comedian, and he does these 10-minute interesting podcast videos on YouTube. And he did a super take of all these CNN and other mainstream news shows, and at the end of each one it's like, and this show is brought to you by Pfizer.
Yeah,
So yeah,
that.
so Pfizer wants to put an extra zero, but there's just people who like, they truly believe that, like, and I saw this guy who's a political campaign manager on his Twitter today, and he said, because if delaying the requirement for healthcare workers to not get extending the minority, we'll see more people who have the shot quit. To which I responded, really? Name me 3 countries where that's happened. I mean, we have Sweden, Norway, Finland, United Kingdom are all got rid of their passports and mandates. You got nothing like that in Florida or Texas or many of the states. So what you just said is preposterous. And no, but he is convinced that if everyone gets vaccinated, he won't get COVID. But the more and more science is coming out and showing that we're all going to get it. And there's nothing we can do about it other than dying before we get it.
Right. Now I'm going to touch on, I'm going to get conspiratorial for just for a few minutes. You know who Klaus Schwab is, right?
Yep. Oh, yeah. The World Economic Forum.
Yeah, I just saw a video. I saved it, as a matter of fact. It was a very short video of him just speaking and saying, if I can remember the exact words, I don't think I can remember the exact words, but it was, until we have 100% vaccination, no one is safe. And I think this was in the context of saving the planet or saving humanity.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering, that is such a nonsensical thing. As you said, we're all going to get it eventually.
Yep.
So why is the vaccine? Why? All right. Well, that's enough of that.
Well, no, I like I said, I just think it's like they've all worked themselves up into this frenzy. It's like the moral panic in the 80s when you had all these parents were convinced that their children in their daycare care centers are being molested by a satanic cult because their children were telling them this. Like, that happened. It's completely crazy to look back on it now, but we get these moral panics every so often. And that is what we're going through. This is just like a global moral panic. And people are being completely unreasonable in a way that they wouldn't be 20 years ago. If you remember the movie Philadelphia, like, these people are the bad guys in the movie Philadelphia. And we see Tom Hanks and Denzel Washington were getting awards in that movie.
Well, I actually never did see Philadelphia.
Ah, okay. But
sorry. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So you pick a topic now. Go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, yeah. Just sure, the World Economic Forum is trying their great reset, but they're just one of thousands of factions involved in trying to rule the world. And they're just, I mean, did you know? Okay, so I was looking into when I was looking into moving to going to visit the Netherlands. Apparently, the World Economic Forum had a pilot program where Canada and the Netherlands were going to have the same passport, and it stopped in 2020. It was supposed to roll out in 2020. So for all their like global taking over, they were also trying to get just like the ability for first world countries to be reciprocal citizenships, essentially. Like that was their master plan, and they got derailed by COVID.
So they don't believe in ethnic in patriotism or some sort of a cultural nationality. I mean, the Netherlands, they might speak English, but they speak it with such a guttural rolling R that you can't even understand them. How could and Canada, which has 2 languages of its own.
Yeah.
Boy, that's interesting.
But it was just like, so like for everyone who's going around saying they had this nefarious plan, I'm like, look, like this was a part of their plan, and COVID completely shot down like their rollout of a universal passport between Canada and Netherlands. So I think they're just one more group trying to exploit the opportunity. I don't think they're the guys who did this. I still think it's just the Chinese had low controls in their lab, and they tried to cover it up. And when they couldn't cover it up anymore, they said to themselves hard, they looked at the situation very hard and said, how can we exploit this to the world? And that explains a lot of the things that happened in the months afterwards. First, they lied as long as they could, and then so they could get all the sympathetic countries like mine would send them all their our PPE, and then they purposely sold us broken stuff in the aftermath.
Well, that's good. Let me. That reminds that there's a post that Henry Ray Sett put up, I guess, yesterday, and it's sort of condemnatory of Fauci. And I commented that just that morning I had sort of felt sorry for Fauci, and then of course I saw him testify in front of Ron Paul's son and Rand Paul, yeah, and then it sort of took away most of my sympathy for him. But what do you think of Fauci? What is your general impression?
He is the same kind of. It's hard to say. He's a Dr. Mengele like figure, I think, in the thing. These people who quietly stood in there and did all the terrible got away with it in Nazi Germany. Like, I think that's kind of him. He's like, he truly probably thinks he's doing good work when he's butchering thousands of puppy dogs. I, of course, do not agree to that idea, but I think these guys and these bureaucrats in the National Institute of Health completely lost control over what they decided they were going to play God and started giving out money to support their things instead of doing their primary job, which was prepare for public health. And they have, like Dr. J has said, they've made such a dog's breakfast of it. But I think in the end, they were just like, they thought they knew better. They're like a lot of smart people. They think they know better, and they're not going to allow a few pesky things like morals get in their way of making the world a better place. Because when we have whatever they're cooking up, we'll be happy. And there will be no problem. Nothing will ever possibly escape. The Chinese are not going to have like terrible standards or that. I mean, at least in defense, at least when the Soviets were doing this kind of stuff, they put it in these hidden cities and like in the middle of the desert. So if there was ever a lab break, it would break out in the middle of the desert.
Right, but
they didn't put it in the middle of downtown Toronto.
Well, he made the point that he didn't put it in New Jersey. He put it in Wuhan, China, for Pete's sake, with the enemies yeah, it's another thing. Wow. Well, how do you feel about what, I didn't hear this, I didn't read this separately, but what Rand Paul said, which is that in Wuhan, they're actually currently working with viruses that have a case fatality rate of between 15 and 50%. And Fauci basically didn't bat an eye. Yeah. He just said, we need to do this. And I just can't believe it. I mean, Mengele, did he really, he had no clue that he was evil? He didn't go, after dinner.
There's a great little movie where about like the final solution, where all these people get together in 1941 or something like that to figure out how they're going to do this. And like there's people in the room that are like, well, the simple solution is we just sterilize, don't tell them that we're sterilizing them, and when they die out of old age, blah 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 blah. And it's the guy that the Czech shot in 42, his name's escaping me. He's the ringleader of this whole situation, and he really insists that they're going to have to do it like the hard way, because that's the best way for everyone. And at the end of the movie, I believe it's Mengele walks outside, gets on a bike, and rides away. He kisses some girl and gets on his bike and just rides off like it was no big deal. And they had spent the 2 hours of the movie or the days just figuring out how they were just going to casually kill millions of people.
Well, my definition of psychopath is somebody, it goes back to the 1800s, is somebody who actually has no empathy, no moral guidance. He just basically lives for himself and uses the system as best he can.
Yeah, I'm not too sure Fauci falls into that particular kind of case, and I don't even think Mengele kind of did. It's like that whole situation of like the line of "we meant well." People with a purpose can justify pretty much anything if it needs to, and I think Fauci falls into that more into that category of these people who think they know better than you, and they're going to do what's best for you. The typical government experience, right? I was watching a show earlier today, and they're called the Behavior Panel on YouTube, and they're 4 body language experts, and they were doing they were watching some interviews of the woman who ran Theranos, and they were trying to figure out if they thought she was a psychopath or that. And what guy said, the situation with a psychopath is they don't know, they can't read, they have a very limited stunted emotional thing, and they will try to read you and they've never experienced these emotions because there's something wrong with them, and they will try to imitate other people and look for people's references to try and figure out try to read people to see how they should be. They're trying to copy us. They're like mimics, and they're not doing a very good job of it. And I just don't see those kind of, I'm not like I spend hours watching Fauci, but I don't see him having those particular character traits.
Right. Well, I don't see them either, but I was just wondering. So you think that we won't talk, I won't mention Fauci, but you think that Mengele did have a conscience? It was just a misguided conscience.
Yeah, his problem is that, remember, they all thought Jews were not people, right? And when you otherize someone out of the situation in the way they did, they just didn't think they were. There was no more to them. Killing a Jew was no more different than killing an ant while crossing the street, which is a pretty disgusting, terrible thing to think. But that's kind of what a lot of these people thought.
I have basically 2 minds. I have an intellectual mind that can accept that Susan wrote a post. I don't know if you saw it. If you were the guard that had that could push the button to put the gas in the gas chambers in Nazi Germany, would you do it? And with children especially, she said. I think she said. I won't mention his name because I can't put the at Bastiat. So I'll just say a member said that basically I'm paraphrasing, but basically most people I think would do that. I think he was implying. And he even said, and I certainly hope that I wouldn't. And so the conversation was sort of like, there are good people that wouldn't do that. And I don't know where I was going with that.
I think you were going to basically, we all like to think we would be joining the French Resistance and doing our best to fight the Nazis, but the records seem to be pretty clear. Most people turned on their neighbors pretty quick.
Yeah. Well.
And I think we got to see a milder form of that during the pandemic.
Yeah, that's maybe something that what I was saying was that there's an intellectual side to me that I can understand, that people are evil, people will push the button, but when I actually see somebody contemplating pushing the button, it's completely foreign to me, and I can't fathom it. It's and I can't, and this disconnect. I don't know that I'd even call it cognitive dissonance. I just can't believe that the government of the United States is doing what it's doing. It just seems so foreign to me. I mean, I was raised. The freedom of speech has been not just by in word, but has the ethos, I guess you call it, has been absorbed by me since I was 3. You say what you mean, and you have the right to say it. And nowadays, to see that things are being censored, I just don't. I feel like I'm Gulliver in Lilliput. That I just don't. I just don't know that I belong. How do you? I mean, how do you view it?
See, as one thing I can say is that we don't have as many problems with this stuff bubbling up here in Canada as well as it went down to the States for a variety of different reasons. Like when there was Black Lives Matter protests, there was like a day. There was just like everyone came out on a Saturday and they all protested and then they all went home, right? So it's been just like, but you've had in the United States, we've had our own moments like that in the past. And I think in some ways we were just ahead of the curve. Like we've already gone through I was saying this to a friend of mine. He's like, I don't want to be, he was like a foreign policy guy and he was conservative. And he's like, I don't want to go join the Democratic Party or something like that. But he's a Canadian. I said, well, you didn't have to, because the conversation didn't go that way here in Canada. We were like, in some ways, we already had in the 1990s, we really had our political realignment that the United States is currently going through. So the foreign policy guys with the national security guys stayed in our party. We weren't driving them out like that because all the government workers, right, in Washington, D.C. So you have like places that are like 97% Democrat, right? Like whenever everyone you do know is a Democrat, I think it's just like you. But what's happening where was I going with this? It's just, you have a lot of ideological pressures. You're going through this great political shift. But it's also, you had decades of people screwing up your education system beyond all repair. And they have made I even saw this here one time. So I used to own a house and I used to rent out rooms, and one person who was renting the room had a 18-year-old daughter, right, who was in Stone High School. And one day it turns out I was driving to work and she needed to be dropped off with her dad. So I said, sure, I'll drive there. And we're driving along and she says to me, I'm going to miss all these trees when they're gone. And I said, what do you mean? Well, all the trees are going to be gone in 15 years. That's what my teachers told me. And I'm like, look, all these trees are going to be here in 15 years. Like some of them might be houses, but especially, I mean, now we have more trees on the earth than we've ever had since human civilization began.
Well, let me just touch on free speech in Canada again, because I don't know that much about Canada. All I know about Canada is that Mark Stein and Ezra Levant apparently live there on occasion, and
Ezra still lives here.
Both they had come into with the language tribunals, or whatever you call them. My internet connection is unstable.
Yeah, it's you this time. I finally got a cord.
Oh yeah. Did Ezra Levant, did he restore free speech to Canada?
Well, we never had free speech to begin with. We have speech within reason. And it's straight out of the charter.
And what about the preacher? I think his name is Polanowski or something like that. Is he actually being told that he has to say certain things, or that
the judge told him he has to? Now I'm sure that he doesn't.
Has to. See, maybe this doesn't affect the Canadian mind. The censorship in the United States doesn't affect not necessarily you, but the Canadian mind that much, because maybe you haven't had, in quotes, freedom of speech.
Yeah.
And wow.
Yeah.
Well, it's hard for me to take.
I remember a girl once saying to me in a car ride, she said, like, you ever hear of separation of church and state? And she was a Canadian liberal. And I said, that's that American thing, right? Because as last time I checked, we're still a theocracy. And she's like, what do you mean we're a theocracy? I'm like, well, who's the head of who's the who's on all our coins? And she's like, well, the queen. Yeah. And what religion is she the head of? And she's like, what? Anglicanism. Every Commonwealth country is effectively a theocracy.
So the reason that the police use batons in England, Canada, and Australia is because they're a theocracy.
We're like the worst theocracy around. Most people don't even realize we're a theocracy. But I'm like, yeah, the head of state for Canada and United Kingdom and everywhere else is also the head of the Church of England.
Oh. Yeah. Well, I guess I've exhausted my topics. You go ahead.
Well, what's COVID been like in Guam?
Well, let me just say that Gary Robbins asked me to write or he just made it a comment. Oh, you can. It was actually from our last broadcast, I think.
Yeah.
Write about what it's like living in Guam or what Guam is like. And my immediate reaction was, I will never write that post. So, but ooh, see, I don't know who on Guam might actually ever watch this.
Yeah.
And so, but Guam pays lip service to the Constitution.
Mm-hmm.
In a way that, I guess every state or every person does, but pays lip service. But I think that the Constitution doesn't really have the force in Guam that it does have other places in the United States, in states. And I still have to wear a mask when I go into a building, a commercial building on Guam. And theoretically, I have to carry my vaccine card with me to be allowed to be in. Now, nobody's ever checked out for our cards, but we still have to wear a mask, and we still have to be able to give proof that we've gotten vaccinated. So I kind of feel that I tend to feel like it's not really leaving the house, going out, going shopping. It used to be a pleasure, and now it's a chore because I don't like wearing a mask, and I don't like trying to understand somebody who's wearing a mask, because I guess I read lips more than I hear. And also it's just so naturally hot on Guam that my mask gets soaked fairly quickly.
Right.
And
making it completely useless.
Yeah, and but it's also uncomfortable. And so I just so it's COVID on Guam is really, I don't have any kids, but some of the people I know, their kids are either in school or out of school, depending on what week or month it is. And I think we've had 7,000. I think we were having 7,000 cases a day, or 7,000 cases a month, or whatever it was, or a week.
Yep.
And 7,000 is a big percentage of the population. So I have to wonder, are these real? And plus, Guam is still has just extended its pandemic status for another month, and I don't quite understand why. So it's just, I just have to fall back on my standard description of Guam. It's hot.
Okay. Yeah, that's no problem. No, yeah. I'm looking forward to getting out of here and just having more options, and that's what I'm looking forward to do. Just like
in
Bulgaria, Poland, wherever. But a friend of mine says, look in the Airbnb stats to see what the rental costs are, like that. But guess what? I was watching a video on Macedonia, and they were going around realtors, and a place. I have a 1,200 square foot condo, right? and they go into this one place, and the guy says, "So, what's the property taxes here?" And the girl says, "Oh, 50 euros, of course, a month, a month," and he's like, "A year."
Yeah.
Like, the cost of living in these places is a lot cheaper. I'm like, I could do like I could see myself being a tour guide, English tour guide or something like that in some of these countries, getting a residence permit and just settling down there. And it just seems to be different and more laid back
And
and
you
relaxed than.
give yourself 3 to 6 months and you'd have Bulgarian history and architecture down pat.
Right.
Huh. Bulgaria. Where I hate to show my ignorance, but where is Bulgaria located?
North of Greece.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's where
And
Bulgaria. Yeah,
and
it's
it's
that country
surrounding.
just. It's it's kind of this square rectangle on top of Greece.
Okay.
I like to say it's like Greece without the Greeks. I know a few people might find that a bit offensive, but the Greeks have a certain reputation for being like laid back and like maybe we'll open our shop today kind of attitude. But this except when they're outside their country, except and when they're outside their country, they suddenly become the most productive people on the planet, and they say so. But it's just. The Mediterranean lifestyle seems to inculcate this kind of like easygoing style that I hear is also what you find in southern US or Vancouver, where there's just kind of like people are more not as uptight as us northerners. So
What's the religion in Vancouver?
communism? No.
No, I meant is it Protestant or?
Yeah, they would for the longest time they would have been the most loyal because what happened is when Canada went in waves of immigration, right? So the last people who came to Canada, so most of the people were still first generation English, were in Vancouver and in British Columbia.
I tend to think that just generally speaking, that colder countries have more productive people in them because they have to work to live.
Right.
And the hotter the country, the more laissez-faire everything becomes.
Yep. I was talking to a friend of mine. He loves the Philippines. He's working on his second wife from the Philippines. But he described like the first time he went there, he's like, look, you just go to the bar. There's these girls who come in. They've been working at their job all day. They take over the radio and they start singing. Maybe they sing and they hang out. They have a few drinks and then they go home. And that's kind of their life. And I'm like, you know what? That sounds so much better than all this complicated stuff we do here for fun, right?
Well, what do you mean?
Well, I was involved in what's called LARPing for the longest time until recently. So that was where me and my friends would dress up and pretend to be vampires, secret rulers of the night for a weekend.
Oh, let me tell you a story. I did this when I was, I guess, 18 years old, and I don't remember exactly what the deal was, but back then there was this thing where a car would stop at a red light or a green light, and then or at a red light, and then when the light turned green, everyone would jump out of the car, run around the car 360 degrees, and get back into the car, and then they drive off again. But what I did, I think, was had something to do with pretending that somebody got out of the car and ran away for his life, and we grab him when we take him back in the car, and then we drive away. Yeah. Well, my little brother, a couple of years later, thought this was a grand idea, and he and his buddies were in a white van, and they had dropped off a friend at the walking toward the intersection. I don't know, 500 feet or 1,000 feet before the intersection, and they stopped at the light. And then they got out of the van and they had a toy gun that was only half there. The slide was missing, so it was basically just a handle.
Yep.
And they manhandled him and they threw him in the van, and they when the light turned green, they drove away laughing.
Yep.
And so they're driving through town and they're going toward the mall, and they see this cop car pull up behind him and turn his blue lights on and turn the blue lights off again. And so then they don't pay attention really. And so they pull into the parking lot of the mall. And the next thing you know, there are a dozen cop cars or more surrounding them with 24 officers. They're leaning over the doors of the cop car with their guns pointed at them, yelling, "Throw the gun out of the van! Throw the gun out of the van!" And so the guy, what gun? Give me the gun! And he drops it outside the driver's window, and then the police yell, "The hostage, come out of the van now!" And they yelled that a couple times, and finally the guy who was driving the van gets, I think it was the guy who was driving the van, gets out and holds his hands up in the air, and they're saying, "You're the hostage?" And he goes, "Well, we're not really a hostage." And the cop comes over and picks the gun up, which is just a fraction of a gun, and he realizes it's plastic, and he tries to break it, and they end up calling. I think they took all the kids to the police station and called their parents.
Right.
That was LARPing in the day.
Right. Well, I think that's a great place to leave this particular conversation, don't you?
Okay. All right.
So I think this has been pretty good, and if we don't have a guest next time, we can do something like this again.
Yeah, sure. Or actually, if you okay, we could open this up. Sure. To have 4 or 5 people, and just anybody who wants to join.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been great if BDB were here, or she, or Susan, or Basquiat, or just whoever.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Okay. Yeah. Kind of like a Zoom party line for the show. Okay.
Yeah, just a thought. Yeah. But it was fun. Thanks.
Yeah, it was. It was kind of a nice way to end a bad day. So thank you.
Okay, good.
And I hope you have a good one.
Thanks. I will. I'm
okay.
sure I will.
See you guys all in the comments.
Righty. Bye-bye.